Okay, guess we'll get started. So I'll call the meeting to order, and I'll begin with the land acknowledgement. So I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. So the first thing on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? Okay. Next on the item, where this is the first meeting of the Planning Advisory Committee since the 2024 election, is the election of chair. So I will call for nominations for the chair of the committee.
I'll move Randy Palmer to the chair.
I'll second that.
Okay, moved and seconded. Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? And third and final time, any other nominations? Okay, Councillor Palmer, do you accept?
I'll accept, nobody else wants it.
Okay, the chair is yours.
Thank you, Brian. Next on the agenda is the election of the vice chair. Is there any nominations for vice chair? Is there a seconder?
I'll second it.
Move and second. Any other nominations? Any other nominations? One and third final time. Any more nominations? Hearing none. Ronnie, do you accept? Okay, thank you, Ron. Okay, before we get started, I'd like to welcome Bonnie Morgan, our new representative from the public. So thank you very much for putting your name forth and coming to this meeting. And we look forward to your insight. So. Okay, next is any errors, omissions, corrections to the minutes of August the 14th. Brian?
wasn't at the meeting.
No?
No, so
Oh,
I'm marked
oh,
as
you're
in
on there.
attendance, so
Oh, you're on
I'm not,
Okay.
that is an error in those minutes.
Okay, we'll take that off. Is there any other errors, omissions, or corrections? One more time. Any other errors, omissions, or corrections? Seeing none, we'll consider those approved. Next on the agenda, the last thing is the review of the land use bylaw. Ian, thanks for coming tonight. And you want to walk us through what the public consultations, what you heard and everything like that? And then, do you want questions during it or at the end?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, maybe on what we heard. So maybe I can give a step back a little bit. So I guess tonight, for the context of the people in the room, we've just been going through the draft engagement for the land use planning documents, the land use bylaw and municipal planning strategy, and I'll talk a little bit about what happened for all of that for everybody's benefit. And then really tonight, the purpose is we had a fair bit of feedback, especially last minute feedback. And so kind of my goal for tonight, if it suits you PAC, as a PAC, is to kind of review each piece of feedback and then look for some direction from you as a planning advisory committee on how we should update these documents to respond to that feedback. And we've prepared recommendations. It's all in detail into what we heard in policy direction report, but I'll put them up on the screen as well and give some context. So does that?
Warden Parker.
Just before we start through that, could we get an idea of the timeline that we're under here in terms of, the things that have to happen before a certain date, that we have to have this into the province? I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
how much time do we have, I guess?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Warden Parker. So currently our deadline from the province in terms of having documents adopted is the end of March. So we're rapidly coming up on that. Working backwards from that, you'd want to be having a public hearing and potential second reading in March, which would mean first reading in February. So we're kind of setting direction now. We'll go back and put the pedal to the metal in terms of polishing up a final draft to bring to council in February for potential first reading.
So we are, I guess my point, if we're coming up against the timeline, we don't have a lot of time to have more meetings and that type of stuff, which we've been asked some of, you know, in order to have it at our February council meeting. That's 3 weeks.
Yeah.
To have this put together.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to have it in perspective of what we're up against there in terms of timeline. Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Okay, Ian?
Okay, so you know, again, for everybody's context, we've been through the province. Bill 58, which was passed in 2018, has kind of been bumped out over time. But that bill mandated that all municipalities and all areas of all municipalities in Nova Scotia be planned. And as we just discussed, the deadline for that now is kind of becoming firmer and firmer, and that deadline is currently the end of March. So we are at the stage where we have a draft municipal planning strategy, draft land use bylaw that were released in November. And when we have since been taking them out for engagement to get feedback on what we got right, and more importantly, what we need to change. And I think I will say generally, you know, again, for the benefit of people in the room, the direction from council early in this process was to have a fairly light touch, and I think we've done that. But certainly, there's adjustments that we can be making in response to the feedback. So, the draft engagement that's happened over the last 2.5 months has been a series of 6 workshops throughout the municipality, kind of trying to hit, don't have the resources necessarily to hit every community or every district, but trying to hit every other district and some of the ones that we didn't get the first time around. So 6 meetings around the municipality. We also had an online feedback forum where people could provide submissions on the drafts, questions, and especially recommendations or suggestions or concerns. We also received many direct emails from community members. And then many people requested follow-up, so we've had a series of calls and emails back and forth with people who provided feedback. And I still have a couple more to do. It's been a busy week. So for anybody who hasn't heard from us yet, my goal is to do that ideally tomorrow. We also updated the project website with information on the drafts, and we've had a number of visits since then. And finally, we also did that workshop session as an online presentation for anybody who couldn't make it in person, recorded that session, and had it on the project website for people to watch later. All of this was advertised to the municipality's newsletter, through radio ads, social media, project webpage, and emails to the project mailing list. So we heard a lot of feedback, and a lot of that feedback was, clarification and in terms of what does this mean for my land, why were things done the way they were. So we had a lot of good conversations, phone calls, emails back and forth, answering questions, clarifying questions, also at the community meetings as well. We had a number of suggestions to change zoning on particular pieces of property, or to change the land use bylaw, the zones themselves, to make them work better. And then finally, we certainly heard concerns from people about feeling uninformed about the project, only recently hearing about it for the first time. And for those people, I apologize that the word didn't make it to you, and certainly hoping to continue to get the word out as the project continues on. I think, taking a step back, 2 of the biggest themes we heard in the engagement was kind of on this, resistance, but also support for planning. We no doubt heard a lot of concerns about the Imagine MOPC project and the implementation of planning in a municipality that hasn't had any other than for wind turbines, and what that means for individual landowners' rights, letting people do what they want to with their land and all of those things. And certainly recognize those concerns, and I think, again, that's in many ways reflected in the light touch that we've tried to take with these documents. There's also certainly concerns about where the mandate for planning's coming from, or desires for people to be able to opt out. But again, we do have that mandate through the province, Bill 58, to have this, so that do want to emphasize that this is something we have to do, but we're trying to keep it as light as possible. But on the flip side of things, for as much as we heard concern about planning and worry about what that means, we also heard a lot of support for it. People recognizing the importance that some having at least basic regulations would be for them. People who have been impacted by land use incompatibility, having a use next to them that's noisy or smelly or whatever it may be, and how that impacts their quiet use of their property and all of that. So certainly also heard a lot of support for planning, and in some cases, requests for more stringent regulation. And then kind of wrapped up in that is just the general uncertainty, and again, we're in a context of not having planning, and what if you're not used to dealing with that, what does that mean? And worries about red tape and all of those things. So certainly appreciate that. More specifically, we heard a lot of feedback about shoreline development, coastal development, and also the shoreline zone kind of related to that. So the shoreline zone is well, it's a new zone because they're all new, but it's particularly applied to coastal areas, and also applied within 300 meters around lakes, and in coastal areas specifically to private road subdivisions, recognizing those cottage subdivisions, those private road subdivisions are very residential. We expect them to be residential, and that this S1 zone, the shoreline zone, which is fairly restrictive in the uses it permits, is appropriate to that residential context. So a lot of the discussion and feedback we had was confusion about the application of that zone, questions about it. We were able to clear much of that up, but certainly heard those concerns. We also heard concerns that the zone was too restrictive, uses that people want to see in their residential shoreline communities, things like restaurants, private clubs, that sort of thing, and a desire to expand that list. And then again, that confusion piece, but also support for protecting our coast and protecting our lakes. So, as I said, the S1 zone was mainly applied to larger lakes that are near roads where development is possible, and the idea was to apply it within that kind of 300 meters, 1,000 feet around the lake, to reduce the impact on these water bodies, these places that people want to live. But if we overdevelop them, they're not good for that purpose. So making sure that protection of those water bodies is there in that zone. And then, as I said, also on those coastal private road subdivisions, those very residential rural areas. So we had a number of suggestions around the S1 zone. Many of them were rezoning suggestions, and I'll talk about those later tonight. But we did have suggestions to change what uses were permitted in the S1 zone. So to add that restaurant, to add that private club use to the zone. So I'll be looking on a little bit of direction from you in terms of whether we maintain the zone as is, or whether we amend it to permit restaurants or private clubs, or both. And our recommendation in this case would be that fourth option, to amend to do both. And it's reasonable. People asked for it. That zone allows some other uses like retail. Generally, I think the impact of it all would be fairly minor, quite frankly. Any questions or discussion about that?
So does this mean that there is no S1 zone, that it melts into, it's all uses are sort of open the same as we are with, what's the other one, or rural general or whatever? Or is that what we're doing here, treating it the same as every other zone?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the warden. No, the suggestion in this instance is to expand what's allowed in that zone a little bit. make it a little more permissive, but to keep the S1 zone. We did, once we talked to people about what the intent of that zone was and why what the criteria was behind applying it, I get the sense that a lot of those conversations came away very positive and people understanding the intent and appreciating the protection that meant for their areas. So I certainly wouldn't, I don't think, recommend doing away with the zone altogether. It would be more an expansion of what's permitted in that zone. And I think when we go back and update the draft, also being more clear in the plan why we applied that zone to the areas that we did, so that people looking at this can say, oh yeah, I see why the zone is the way it is.
So again, through you, Mr. Chair, so it's gonna be very specific things that are allowed in the S1 zone, not that somebody can't come here or whatever and ask for, special treatment or whatever words used to get something else in there, but it won't just be opening it up, it'll be saying, like you mentioned, restaurants and clubs. Would there be some other terms there as well?
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, currently as drafted in the November draft, that zone allows accommodations, farmers markets, marinas, marine recreation, retail stores, dwellings up to 2 units on a lot, and then there's an ability to consider more through a development agreement process for things like, bare land condo developments and that sort of thing. And then things, cultural and community uses like community centers, daycares, medical clinics, places of worship, and recreation. So it's a fairly, in the grand scheme of all the zones that we've drafted in this bylaw, it's certainly one of the more restrictive ones. But it, again, is kind of intended to align with those rural shoreline residential developments that are, the cottage developments on private roads where it is predominantly residential. Other than that, you might expect a couple of community type uses, recreational type uses, and maybe small commercial. But it is, people presumably in those areas don't expect to have industrial in their neighborhood. They don't expect to have resource type uses, that kind of thing.
And one more, if I might, Mr. Chair. You said the 2 buildings, whatever, per lot. So did you hear any feedback from anybody on that?
I don't believe we did, through you, Mr. Chair. I don't believe we had some properties that were miszoned, were improperly zoned S1, and I have recommendations about changing that later in the discussion tonight. There was an existing land lease community, for example. But beyond that, I don't believe we heard anything specifically about the number of units permitted on a lot in the S1 zone.
Okay, thank you.
Just on that, Ian.
Yeah.
The most recent one that was sent out, I didn't see the S1 zone on that map.
The most recent,
Email with the, it's the draft future land use map, and it has the, service communities in the general zone, and
yeah. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so that would be the future land use map. The one that you would need to look at for those, so that's on the plan side of things. It's a broad, high level, community categorization kind of. The map where you would see the S1 zone would be on the zoning map, which would be found in the land use bylaw.
land use bylaw.
Yeah.
Okay. Because the S1, there's a lot of coastal properties that were missed.
Yeah.
And some that were more inland and things like that, so.
Yeah, so we tried to capture all of the coastal private roads, but if there are ones that are missed, if there are properties that front on private roads in the coastal areas and we miss them, certainly send us a list, based these areas better than we do, and we can make sure that they're captured as we tweak the final draft.
Okay.
You okay with that option 4? Does that sound reasonable to?
Yeah, well, agreed for option 4.
expanding to permit,
I'll have a motion, yes. Is moved to add
Move to,
number 4, amended to the S1 zone to permit restaurants and private clubs. Is there a seconder? It's moved and seconded. Any question on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Right.
Counted by nay. Motion carried.
thank you. Okay, the next topic that we heard a fair bit about, and is kind of related to that, is the watercourse buffers. So in the drafts, there are 2 watercourse buffers. One is from inland watercourses that, and it's measured from the high water mark. And it is, it starts at 15 meters horizontal distance, and it can be reduced with on-site study. And the intent of that buffer is primarily to protect that riparian area, that transition between land and water that's typically sensitive, and then also, it's important habitat, it's important environmentally for things like filtering pollutants and that sort of thing. So there's that horizontal buffer inland. We heard some about that, particularly concerns that the definition of watercourse is much too broad, and I'll touch on that in a second. And some desires to see limitations on vegetation removal in that buffer, so to not allow, so it's a horizontal distance, and we say you can't build buildings in it, or certain types of buildings, but there was a suggestion that we actually limit the removal of vegetation in that buffer. The other piece of this is the coastal watercourse buffer. So there's a buffer from the top of bank, and it starts at 30 meters, but that can be reduced again with on-site study. And in this case, it's primarily intended to deal with risk of erosion. I don't think I need to tell you much of the Northumberland Strait, that shore is very sandstony, it's erodible. We see that all the time of cliffs that have gone and cottages, houses at the edge. So the intent here is to have some buffer for that, to allow that erosion to happen and not necessarily have the house go over the edge of the cliff. We heard, there is a mechanism there to reduce that number. It starts at 30 meters. You can reduce it to 15, again with on-site review to confirm that, if, for example, if you're on an area that's not eroding, then maybe that distance is much too strict. So have an ability to reduce that. Of course, one of the biggest things that people do in these areas is to armor rock, to bring in infrastructure to slow or stop that erosion. So there was questions in there about the ability to further reduce that coastal buffer by actually, considering that armor rocking in those coastal areas. So there's a couple of different pieces at play here, so maybe we'll go through them one by one. The first is the watercourse or that coastal buffer piece, and having that flexibility around that distance from the shoreline. It is one of those things that's an issue. People do armor rock, and there are consequences to that. It has environmental implications and also implications on your neighbor, but it's also a very popular approach, and certainly recognize that. So we have a couple of options to address these questions and concerns about the coastal buffer. One is to maintain it as is, that 30 meters with an ability to reduce it to 15. We could remove that buffer altogether and say that, erosion, it's on you, property owner, and whatever happens, happens. We could reduce that buffer to a smaller number, or we could provide additional flexibility within it to allow consideration of things, reduce it maybe as far as 0 in situations where there's no erosion at all. And I think on the balance of things, it is an issue, and it is something that I think the municipality can have a positive impact on by having a coastal buffer, but recognizing there are contexts where there's existing armor rock, where there's roads, other things that might provide some reason why a smaller number is necessary, and that maybe we should expand the flexibility to reduce that coastal buffer.
Mr. Chair?
Warden Parker.
I guess I left that on. This is a contentious issue. It has been for quite some time. Armor rocking is a contentious issue, as you said. I think our plan has to have some rules in it, not just, well, we can go to zero if you wanted zero. So you can build right on the sand almost, you know, which we've had some cases of in this county. And had cases where the beach is blocked off by armor rock too, where this is no longer open for somebody to walk along the beach even. So I think it's a serious issue, and we know that the province has ducked out of it. They were going to, all three parties had agreed to implement, you know, a Coastal Erosion Act, or what, I think that's what it was called. But they've basically said, let the individual decide where to build their house. That's their problem, but just don't come back to us looking for money, I guess, when it falls into the ocean. But I think we need to do more than that. We're just developing some very basic plans here. You know, this council has to decide whether it wants to take up what the province has not ordered us to, but said, here, it should be the municipalities doing this, not us. So I don't think we're doing ourselves any favor by allowing people to build so close that within 10, 15, 20 years, you know, they're going to be going over the bank. I think we need to have some rules on that, and the armor rock is very contentious because it is expensive, so it means that those with enough dollars can armor rock the front of their property, and those without don't just suffer the consequences, they suffer the consequences of their neighbor putting it in because of what happened. So that would have all been included in the Coastal Protection Act if that had been, the regulations had been accepted and moved upon. But we as a council have to decide, you know, that's a bigger project than just this. But this just sets some minimum setback amounts. And I think if we leave it open that, you know, if you really want to, we'll let you move closer and closer. There were some people I spoke to out in the hall as they came in that were coming just for that reason, but they didn't want to sit through the whole meeting, they said, just to be here for that. But they were concerned we were going to make it too far because they had heard 100 meters or something, you see. But we had the expert, or one of the experts in the field, what's his name, Dr. Anybody remember? What was it? Webster, Dr. Tim Webster. Yeah. You know, telling us that the average, I think, is a foot a year of loss due to erosion, but on certain years it can be 3 or 4 feet. So if you're only 15 feet back, maybe you got half a dozen years for your cottage. I don't think we want to have people in that situation, even though they might say, I want it anyway, and I won't worry about if it falls in the ocean, I won't ask anybody for any government money. I don't think we want to set people up for that. So my opinion is that I would like to see us leave it at what it is. If somebody wants to come forward with some reasons why it should be closer, then deal with it, but I wouldn't move it any closer than the 30 meters. That's just one person's opinion, that's all.
Okay, anybody else? Seeing none, well, I'll state my opinion. I think this is something that the council should make a decision on before we move on it. Myself personally, I have a different view than the warden. I think it's really up to the landowner where they want to build their cottage. If they decide they want to build there, it's their money, it's their land, and for us to say you have to build a certain distance is, I think we're making too many restrictions myself. I think people got to be aware, that I think most people are aware of what's happening. The government's coming out with a package to explain things and leaving the decision up to the person. So if somebody wants to spend $200,000 or $300,000 on building a cottage or a home, and they put it that close, and in 15, 20 years it's in the ocean, well, that's something I think it's their decision to make. So I think before we make any decisions on this, I think we should go to council to see how council wants to move forward with it. Now, that's one opinion. That's my opinion. So, thank you.
Yeah, and if I may comment on that, just in terms procedurally, what I would suggest is that, yeah, ultimately, I mean, it will be council's document at the end of the day to adopt. What we take out of here will be the PAC recommended version. You know, as much as we're on a tight timeline, council does, even at the first reading meeting, can direct us to make changes, and if they're not that complicated, we can make them there and give first reading same night or shortly after. So what I would suggest as a PAC then is to, I think, decide what your recommendation is as the planning advisory committee is, and then council will ultimately have the final say on that come February, on whatever, you know, version we bring to them out of your recommendation.
Okay. Deputy Warden.
Thank you. Just, my concern is the liability for the municipality granting a permit, where that would lie if something happens, if they, you know, if they build within 20 feet or something, then 5 years or so, way it goes to the ocean. So are we gonna be liable for granting the permit, or is there some specifications that we can put in the permit process that we wouldn't be liable for that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, you know, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not your lawyer, so I hesitate to give advice on liability. Certainly, whether or not you are liable doesn't mean, you know, whether at the end of the day you are liable or not, doesn't mean people won't try and hold you so. You know, in the like, they might, they can test it anyways. Generally, and in my experience, issuance of a permit does not necessarily, you know, the issuance of a permit is confirming that you comply with the land use bylaw, not necessarily that what you're doing is a good idea. But again, doesn't mean, even if there is no liability, doesn't mean that people won't be grumpy, won't try to hold you responsible for those situations.
Okay. Anybody else? Bonnie? Go ahead. Bonnie, could you use your mic? Just all you have to do is press the,
Check.
just so you have your computer plugged into
Ah, there we go. Sorry about that. The provincial government already had all of these plans that they then said the municipalities have to take care of, right?
They basically said, we're walking away, it's up to the municipalities if they want to do something with it or not.
Right.
So-
But they had the documents already prepared? Are we able to use, the question is, are we able to use what they,
They have a recommendation package for the landowners to pass out.
oh, but not for us to use as a template for these decisions?
Brian, or Ian?
I do believe they engaged Ian's firm Upland to develop those
Yes.
documents as a separate project last fall timeframe is?
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, in lieu of the Coastal Protection Act, the province released the Coastal Protection Action Plan, which is a series of 15 actions. And one of those actions, Action 8, is the development of example policy and text, land bylaw text for municipalities, basically a toolkit, a model bylaw, if you will, for coastal regulation. They have hired us to do that. Next week, that is all I'm doing is is writing that and polishing that up. It's not my document to release, so I can't put a firm timeline to it, but it certainly would be not the first quarter of this year for release of that as a tool. But it is something that is in that action plan and is intended to help municipalities down the road.
If they want to move forward.
If they want to.
with it.
Yep.
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 Okay. Bonnie, go ahead. Yep.
Through you, Mr. Chair. We have several freshwater springs in Pictou County, Green Hill, Mount Tom, that many people rely on and line up for on a regular basis all year round. Are there protections for these critical water resources?
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair, I think that's, in terms of that inland water course protection, that's certainly part of that, and maybe we can suggest we wrap or finish up the discussion on the coastal piece and then jump to that one, if that makes sense. Because I think, yeah, that is an
Yeah.
important one.
Okay. Earl?
Can you just explain for us the option, because it's pretty broad?
Yeah, so it's, yeah, we did flesh it, it's fleshed out a little more if you, in the document itself. So there's two kind of recommendations that we suggest in terms of flexibility. One is that that we consider, or that we'd cut that coastal buffer off at roads. So, it's a base of 30 meters, but that if you're on the other side, we may want to specify public roads. If you're on the other side of a public road, that buffer stops at the road, because then you got the province, in theory, doesn't mean they won't move the road someday. They're doing that in Lawrencetown and on the eastern shore, but there's someone there whose job it is to maintain that as a bit of a, and it ends up being defensive for the property owner on the other side of that road. The other flexibility that we're suggesting is to allow further reduction of that buffer in those areas where, there's suitable geology. It's rare in Pictou County, but there might be some, outcroppings of land that simply doesn't erode, or erodes very, very slowly. And B, on the basis of existing armor rock, existing at the time of this. So if you have it, it's there, that investment's been made, but that we wouldn't necessarily be encouraging people to go out and put in new armor rock in order to enable themselves to go down to zero.
Okay. Ronnie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess with the 30 meters,
Yes.
I guess it comes down to the common sense of the owner. If he or she chooses to build closer to that, then I think that becomes their responsibility. I think it would be far better if the less that we tell people what to do on the land, the better. But hopefully, in a situation like this, it would come down to common sense that, if they don't know what's happening on the shoreline now, then I guess so be it. But to me, it should be common sense. And I guess I'm not really in favor of the 300 buffer, or the 30-meter buffer, so it's more to the fact that, you bought the land, do what you want, but, the closer you get to that shoreline, the more danger it is.
Is there anybody else? So you want a decision from us to what way we want to move forward with?
Yeah, certainly that would be helpful, Mr. Chair, to have a recommendation for how we take these documents to council. In what form we take these to council.
We've done plans for a lot of municipalities, across this province or in the process of doing, we're doing some, do most of them have a set distance, or we just leave it up to the owner?
Through you, Mr. Chair, ones that were done a while ago, or in the past couple of years, before the Coastal Protection Act was passed. Some of them do have put those in. So I worked on one in Queens County, and we put a buffer there, and that is there. Cumberland County. District of Lunenburg recently, they put their whole plan review on hold specifically to deal with this issue, because it was a very hot topic down there, and they worked just on having coastal regulations, and those are in place. Over the last, year or two since I guess more now, but in the last couple of years since the Coastal Protection Act was passed, a lot of municipalities who were thinking about putting in regulations put that on hold, saying, well, it's coming from the province. So a lot of plans I've worked on recently, up Cape Breton Way and that sort of thing, the policy that's in them says we're deferring to the act. Of course, it didn't pan out. So either they'll have to go back and put something in themselves, or they may just choose to not. So there are some municipalities that have this, lots that are kind of, we're in a wait and see situation with the province.
And right, Mr. Chair, I think that's where the thing is really off track right now, is that every municipality is trying to decide on its own. So you could have, say, Antigonish have a regulation, and that's not. Cumberland maybe having a different regulation, and that's part of the problem, not having the provincial one, but we're not here to debate the provincial one tonight. It's what we're going to do from this municipality's point of view. And again, I'm fully in support of having the 30 meters, because unfortunately, some people are not going to make the wise decision. I've used the comparison before. If you tell people we're not going to have a speed limit on the road anymore, but we're going to give you lots of information and permits as to where's the safe driving spot and everything, and you go and decide what speed you want to drive at. If somebody decides 150 kilometers good for them, well, it's my decision. But that's why I don't trust just saying, now, we have all kinds of our building folks go out and put your basement in, it has to be in a certain way, and it has to be drainage, and it has to be this. We're very specific all along the way as to how they build their house. So how you build your house and where you build your house, we're not gonna just say, build your house anyway. It used to be that way, and that's why a lot of the houses weren't built properly. Now we very carefully regulate them. And sometimes there's a need for regulation. Nobody likes it, but sometimes there's a need. So I think we'd be doing ourselves a disservice by not providing some firm rules. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Anybody want to put a motion on the floor? How do we want to proceed?
If we're not gonna change it, we wouldn't make a motion, would we? If we're going with what's
Well-
there now?
Well, he's asking, there are two different things, is it not?
Yeah, sorry, I guess it's that top one there.
That's
And
all.
really, it's specific, I have it worded as both, but for the inland, but really, we're focused on the coastal. So option one would be to maintain the coastal buffer as is. Option two would be to remove it. Option three would be to keep it but reduce. Option four would be to keep it and provide that extra flexibility as I just discussed.
Ian, could you just review one more time what the public feedback was on this? Just quickly.
We heard some support for this approach. People happy to see it in there. We also heard concern about it. I think we were seeing that today in the room, but predominantly we heard, I would say, worry or confusion or feeling that the documents were unclear in that ability to reduce the buffer. There is a mechanism there to reduce it, but it's unclear how that would play out, and especially in areas of armor rocking, how that would play out, and wanting clarity around that, and an ability to reduce it in those areas where there is armor rocking, and that as a piece of protection.
What's your wishes?
I'll make a motion just to assert, Mr. Chair, that we stay with number one, maintain the current draft approach to water resource buffers.
Okay, is there a seconder?
I think I'll second it.
Second it? Okay. All those in favor, signify by,
Just one question on the motion. So that still has to be council's decision at the end, is that correct?
oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
Recommendations to council.
it's only the recommendation. Okay. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Count by nay. Nay. Two nays. Okay, so we'll move forward with what you have.
Okay, that's what we'll take to council. Okay, through you, Mr. Chair, continuing on the discussion of watercourses, this time switching to those inland ones, the freshwater watercourses. So there is a similarity to that buffer. Instead, it starts at 15 meters and can be reduced down to 7 and change, 50 feet or 25 feet. Again, there's exceptions for things like boathouses, that sort of thing. But what we heard a lot about in this case was the concern about the definition of watercourse. So the definition that's in there now is from the Environment Act, which is very broad, because it's trying to capture all watercourses under the jurisdiction of the province. So it includes things like ravines, groundwater, stuff like that. So admittedly, that is very broad and could be quite restrictive in where we apply, or could result in this buffer being applied a lot of places. So certainly recognize that concern, and we would recommend correcting that issue. There's two different ways we could do that. One is to simplify that definition, remove some of those things that would not traditionally be considered watercourses in people's minds. That those ravines, I think, what else did we have in there? Just a second. Where is it here? Gulch, groundwater, remove them from the definition, and certainly that would be one option. The other option would be, instead of actually having a definition of watercourse at all, specifically choose major watercourses, map them, and say these are the ones that the buffers apply to. There is provincial topographical data, that shows major watercourses. Our general recommendation would be to go that approach, actually, to have a schedule in the land use bylaw that says these are the watercourses that buffer applies to. They're bigger, and through that approach, the development officer isn't having to decide, well, that's a watercourse, that isn't, is that man-made, is that not, is it a drainage ditch, all those things. It's either on the map or it's not, and that's clearer for the development officer, clearer for property owners, and is really better fulfilling the intent of applying to these more substantial major watercourses.
Okay. What's your wishes? Warden Barton?
On this one, I'm more in favor of mapping out those larger rivers and stuff and going with them. And it's for a number of reasons, but Bonnie mentioned that a lot of people go to get water every day. I know they do at the Green Hill Spring. I can rarely go by there. There's not at least one and probably 6 cars lined up, and the one in Mount Tom. If you follow the one in Green Hill, it just comes to a little hole about this big at the top of the hill. Everybody's getting the drinking water from there, but it's coming up from an underground spring. And there's not much danger of anybody doing anything there because it's up a steep hill and, nothing but trees around it. I guess, if somebody cut all the trees, it might be a problem. But, the other aspect I'm looking at is for farmers. And a lot of times an argument comes up, debate comes up over, is that a drainage ditch or is that a brook? Well, if you find one little fish, that becomes a brook. And that presents a lot of problem for the farmer. At that point, he's going to ditch his fields, but he can't ditch them anymore because they found a minnow that came up from the river, got up so far in the ditch, and it was classified as a brook. I've seen that happen many times. So I think if we want to, you then prevent the farmer from working. He has to stay back so far from the ditch anyway for environmental laws and whatnot, but it becomes farther, the amount of his field he can use. So I think it'd be better to go with the major water courses, map them out, and then have whatever restrictions apply to those major water courses. That's my point of view anyway.
Anybody else?
I totally agree with Warren.
Do you want to make a motion?
Yep, sure, that we go with number 3.
Okay, so motion is to go with number 3 to map out the water courses. Move and second it. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Right.
Counted by nay, motion carried.
Thank you. And then the final one on water courses there is that piece around vegetation removal. This was a suggestion from one participant that we actually limit the removal, those water course buffers, they apply to development, they apply to buildings, that kind of thing. This person suggested expanding it to vegetation. We recommend not doing that. The reason for that is that the Act does allow municipalities to regulate vegetation removal, but only in relation to development. So only for things that require a permit. There is nothing stopping you as a landowner from clearing that buffer and then coming to get your permit. It's one of those kind of gaps in the Act. So the people who play by the rules or play by the spirit of the rules get punished, and the people who work around them get rewarded in those situations. And so that's it is a challenge in a lot of municipalities, and especially in the spirit, I think, of the light touch of these documents. There's a lot of other low-hanging fruit that we're dealing with in terms of setting up planning administration and enforcement and having to enforce on vegetation removal in these areas is maybe not, I would suggest, the highest priority. All the things that need to be set up over the next couple of years with these documents. So we would recommend option 1, maintain the current approach of not regulating vegetation
What
removal.
does the committee want to see? Option 1 or option 2?
Mr. Chair, I'm not even sure what we're talking about here. Is this for somebody that wants to remove vegetation from along the edge of the river to work in those fields? But, and we're saying we're gonna regulate it so you can't remove the vegetation?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if we wanted to, we could regulate it in relation to development. So we could say, okay, you own a lakefront property, you've come to us for a permit to build a house on that property. And in doing so, as a condition of that permit, you are not allowed to clear that 15-meter buffer along the edge of the lake. We have that power under the Act to do that. What we don't have is the power to regulate it not in relation to development. So we don't have the power to regulate a farmer in that regard. We also don't have the power to regulate that very same property owner if they do it before they come for the permit. So we only regulate it in relation to the development. It's one of those, this comes up a lot when I talk to people about planning. The riparian area, it's important, we should be protecting the vegetation. Probably a very valid perspective. The tools that we have available to us are lacking in that regard. And so I find that in municipalities that have implemented that tool, it's incomplete, and it kind of, again, penalizes those who follow the spirit of the rules, if I can put it that way.
I agree. Do you want to make a motion?
Motion to leave it.
The motion is to maintain the current approach and not regulate the vegetation removal. Move, second?
I had a question, actually. Several recommendations are being dismissed on the basis that they will be difficult to enforce. However, this ignores the fact that the majority of landowners are not seeking to game the system, but rather look to the county for clear guidelines on what they should do or should not do. We should be setting ideal targets for our trustworthy community to live up to, rather than setting the lowest bar so that we don't have to hold a minority of offenders accountable. Thank you.
Okay, is there anybody else? If not, All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Count by nay. Motion carried. Okay.
I did that.
Yeah.
There's a preview of everything we have to. A lot. Okay. Okay. Next one is source water protection. So, as you're likely aware, the water supplies for town of Pictou, Stellarton, New Glasgow, and Trenton, their watersheds or their recharge areas, if they're wells, extend into the municipality. As part of the draft engagement, we wrote to all neighboring municipalities for comment, and the town of New Glasgow got back to us with a letter requesting specific policy and zoning to protect their water supply at Forbes Lake. So the drafts is currently written. They do recognize the water supplies as being in the municipality and as being of interest for protection. However, you know, I'm not a hydrologist. I'm not a water engineer, and in terms of that protection, the drafts kind of speak to future collaboration with those municipalities on you know, protecting those water supplies as they deem fit, or working with them to identify how those areas should be protected, you know, because they should be important stakeholders in that. So the drafts currently don't provide any specific recommendation, any specific present protection. They do have policy about if there is a rezoning request or a development agreement proposal for like industrial uses that could be a threat to the water course or water supply, that the applicable town would be asked for comment. But otherwise, yeah, there aren't any specific land use controls in those water supplies. So the town of New Glasgow submitted a letter with specific requests to develop you know, I specifically in these documents deem the Forbes Lake watershed an environmentally sensitive area and establish a protected water supply zone around or in the primary watershed of that lake, and have the municipality notify the town when there is any development proposals within the watershed. So when we were producing the recommendations, we had received the letter, but I hadn't spoken with the town yet. So we do have a recommendations in the what we heard document, but I did meet with the town yesterday to discuss their concerns further, and they are, I think, concerned about the approach of working together in the future, or working, you know, amending these documents in the future, worried that there's no timeline attached to that, and that they see this plan development process as kind of the major kick at the can in terms of having land use controls that can help protect their water supply, which is also the water supply for many residents in the municipality. So they would like to see more stringent planning in that area. Do have some concerns, not necessarily that that's a bad idea, but that at this late in the MOPC process, you know, that if we're drastically restricting, you know, development in this area on those landowners who are in that watershed at the 11th hour in this process, and you know, that hasn't been discussed in the public meetings, that kind of thing, that it's kind of being sprung on them as an imposition without their ability to respond. That being said, I certainly appreciate the concern of the town and the desire to strengthen that protection. So, following our discussion with the town, I think our suggestion would be, so we have a number of options here. One is to keep the current draft approach of source water protection, which is to say, you know, we'll work together in the future as desired by these bodies, and that we will notify them if there's major industrial or resource developments. That's option one. Option two is to, you know, implement everything requested by the town to have specific language and a source water protection zone drawn up to apply specifically to Forbes Lake. Option 3 would be to further strengthen the policy and the plan, that, you know, that commitment to working together in the future, and maybe put a timeline to it, or stronger language around that. Or option 4, which, following the meeting with them, again, I'm kind of concerned about a full-on source water protection zone at the 11th hour. But Forbes Lake itself does, within its first 300 meters, have that S1 zone, which is fairly restrictive. It keeps things mostly to residential and community-type uses and small commercial. We could actually expand that S1 zone to the full primary watershed. It provides a substantial amount of what the town is asking for in terms of protection, without kind of, you know, applying that label of source water protection to the landowners that are there, and that we could expand that watercourse buffer that we just talked about, specifically in that Forbes Lake area, as a buffer against their concern about blue-green algae. So, yeah, that's questions on that, or?
One Mr. Chair.
Warden?
Just, when it says expand, the water course buffer, what is it now? There's a protected water area around there now, and what are we talking about expanding it?
So the current watercourse buffer, as we, the inland watercourse buffer, as we just discussed in the previous topic, is 15 meters from watercourses that we're going to map. We could, if we wanted to, say in the Forbes Lake specifically, that number is bigger. They requested 50. So we could increase that watercourse buffer to 50 meters.
So it has a specific number to it.
Yeah.
And where right now it's only, what did you say?
In the draft, it's 15 for all major watercourses.
15,
Yeah.
and they're suggesting 50.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just the town of Glasgow, we get a lot of our water from Forest Lake too, so we have an interest there, not that we wouldn't care about the neighbor's water, but I mean, a lot of our communities are serviced from Forest Lake, or the water comes from Forest Lake, so I always thought there was some protection there now. When I drive up East River Valley, there's fencing around on that.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, there are some existing protections in the sense that the town itself owns a good chunk of the land in that watershed, and acquires, from what they've told me, anytime more comes up for sale, they acquire it. And then it is also a provincially designated watershed. That designation primarily regulates activities in the watershed, so things like ATVing, boating on the lake. I'm not sure if it regulates agriculture. I'd have to go back and look at it. So it's kind of related to some of those activities that might impact the water. It doesn't regulate, land use and development in the way that regulations through your land use bylaw would.
I would be in favor of expanding that, because it is, pretty important. I'm not sure how many, I don't know, landowners up there, I'm not sure how many would be concerned about, if that went to 50, whatever, if that would really, it's mostly forested land, from what I see a lot of it, but, I'm not sure if people would be upset or not. We would say with short notice, we don't know what people's reaction in that area, because we didn't advocate for that. I do agree with that. It seems like kind of the last minute, we may get some real kickback from some landowners up there, I don't know.
I agree, it's very important to protect areas like that, so. And I'd agree to go in what they recommend for 50 meters, that's. Now, the map, it's outlined in blue, that's a watershed, is it? Is that where
On the zoning map?
the zoning map, yeah?
So that's the current extent of the S1 zone, the first 30 meters around the lake. Their watershed, I don't know if I can bring it up on the
The
screen.
watershed looks,
It goes further south. It
Yeah.
extends,
let's take in the mountain and things like that, right? So
yeah,
water
yeah, the
runoff.
primary watershed. They sent me a map yesterday. I'll see if I probably won't be able to bring it up on screen, but I can at least describe it to you. Just Give me a second here.
It's primarily residential out there anyway, like there's not.
Yes. Primarily, it's some forested land, some residential. There is one agricultural operation.
It's on the far side, on the,
Yeah. So their watershed, the primary watershed extends down as far, not even, so it extends south of the lake, but not even as far as like the fork where the two roads join together. How big is that distance? Sorry, I can't put this up on the screen, unfortunately, from my phone. I don't have a scale on it to tell me the measurement, but they said it's about 26 individual property owners, I believe, would be captured in all of that.
okay. Mr. Cameron,
With the people that are there now doing whatever they're doing, they would be grandfathered in anyway.
yes.
This is just for future development.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, certainly. Anything that didn't, if we were to change the zoning for the whole watershed to S1, anything that wasn't permitted in that zone would become non-conforming and would have those grandfathering protections under the Act. So it would be for future development. Yeah, and any of those, again, that S1 zone allows 2 dwelling units per property, so any of the residential would be consistent with that zone. It would mostly be if someone wanted to do something more along the lines of like resource-related uses or that kind of thing.
Salvage yard.
Salvage yard, yeah, salvage yard. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. What's the wishes? Deputy Warden.
Well, Mr. Chair, I think this is very important. I think we should go with number 4 because it's water that our residents use for sure, and if something happens at lake, we're gonna be in a bad mess along with the town of Glasgow, so I'd recommend number 4. Is that, and that's,
Motion?
yes, and that's to a
Second.
50,
Yeah, to
and that one
expand,
goes to a 50, right?
to expand the S1 zone to the whole and primary watershed and to expand the buffer within, around Forbes Lake from 15 to 50 meters.
Okay. There's a motion on the floor. Any questions? Seeing none? All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Count my nay. Motion carried.
Thank you. Okay, transition between core and rural zones. So, currently in the drafts, there's, the rural areas are primarily rural general, which is quite wide open. It's the most flexible zone and allows most things except for heavy industrial requires some processing and processes and scrap yards and that sort of thing, but most things are permitted in that zone. There are areas that are that are serviced, that have sewer in the ground, that we've zoned community core. That zone is more restrictive, but it's, recognizing that these areas are typically a little more urban or a little more suburban, and the full suite of rural uses might not be permitted, not be appropriate. There is, however, concern that certain areas that are community core are actually quite rural in nature, even though they have a sewer in the ground. Places like the road into Scottsburn, there's a sewer that runs there, but there's a lot of livestock operations, that kind of thing. So concerned that it's actually quite rural. So that transition between the rural and the community core was a concern. And then there was also generally, on the other end of the scale in rural areas is the shoreline zone, which we've talked about, that's fairly restrictive in terms of what the uses it allows, but there's not much in between. It's either you're that very open rural general or you're that very residential focused shoreline zone, and there's nothing in between that sort of protects you but doesn't fully restrict you. So one of the options, I guess, is to maintain that current approach, rural general on one end of the scale, shoreline on the other, and community core for those areas that have sewer serviced. Another is we could tweak the uses that are permitted, make the shoreline a little more flexible, the rural general a little more strict, or the community core a little more flexible, especially for those agricultural uses. Or I think the third piece that kind of addresses this, as well as addresses some of councillors' comments, in the areas of Plymouth and that sort of thing, areas that are maybe rural, but people are looking for protections, is to create a new zone, a mixed-use zone, rural mixed-use zone that is wider open than what's available, but is more restrictive than the rural general, to address those kind of transition areas, address the areas in Scottsburn, address the coastal areas that are not necessarily industrial based or resource based, but where people want wider range of commerce, that sorts of thing.
So this would be a creation of a new zone,
A new zone, and we wouldn't, again,
what type of use are they looking at? Is it small commercial or?
Yeah, I think, my suggestion for this would be a pretty wide range of residential, a decently wide range of commercial, maybe not some of those like heavy equipment sales and service and that sort of thing, but, like retail, restaurants, all those range of commercial, veterinarians, that sort of thing, community uses. But then, where this would primarily differ, I think, from the rural general zone is restricting things like industrial uses and maybe some of those heavier resource-related uses like aggregate processing and that sort of thing. But keeping the agricultural piece to it to accommodate Scottsburn and those type areas like that.
So we're just looking at the two areas, the Plymouth area and the Scottsburn area
Yeah.
with that? Warden Parker.
Okay, at this moment, I'm going to speak on behalf of another counselor who couldn't be here tonight. Counselor Turner is at our climate change meeting in Eureka, and he asked me to bring his concerns forward, and I think this is where they fit in. You mentioned Scottsburn and Plymouth, but he's talking about District 8, which is Abercrombie, Westville Road, Alma, up the one side of Green Hill. I represent the other side. He represents the side facing Alma. He's concerned that he wants that area, or more of that area, I should say. Some of it, Brian just showed me, already is in, what's the name of it? Community Core. Community Core.
Yep.
But he feels that more of it should be in Community Core. He said he's heard from residents in his area that they don't feel protected enough by the general zone, that most of this is that a lot of that area will get developed more. A lot of it has water and sewer in it for sure, but it's on roads close to the towns and whatnot, and he feels that it will certainly develop more. In fact, there's development taking place up on the side of Green Hill now. So that was, when I saw this one about mixed use, I thought, well, maybe his area fits in there in some of this, but it's protection they're looking for. They went through probably, I don't know, Wayne would have been here probably, and Ronnie, they went through one of the worst cases of not having any protection back a lot of years ago now. And in the end, the current councillor at that time lost his seat because of it in the next election. They moved in a big, heavy industrial tire plant, or tire retreading plant, and people were up in arms. What do you mean we got no protection? He can just move in here and do this? There's no plan, so he could, and so I think Councillor Turner is concerned that this could, if you're not very careful, this could happen again, this type of thing, if we don't have some protection from, heavy industrial, where we're moving into what could be prime, land or space for residential development. So I want to bring that forward for him tonight.
Okay. Logan, did you have something you wanted to add?
I guess I just have a brief question too. I've also heard from residents of residential community zoning areas asking about protections there. I'm wondering if is the proposed mixed use zoning only going to be only proposed to be adjacent to community cores, or would they be adjacent to residential community areas as well?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. No, I think the intent would be that this zone would kind of be that middle ground for wherever it's needed, that, you know, the serviced areas have the community core zone, they have the community residential zone that are much more protective. But for these unserviced areas that don't have the sewer in the ground, that this would be that transition, you know, for some of those areas that Warden Parker's talking about, some of the areas that Councillor Thompson's brought up in the past, and yeah, that kind of middle ground. It's still, you know, like very often rural in nature or semi-rural in nature, but people don't necessarily want to have to deal with the whole suite of uses that are potentially in these rural areas. So some of that, again, some of that middle ground for all of that.
Mr. Chair, would this address the problems that Mr. Battis and Tom, I forget his last name, in the Scottsburn Road? Would that address the problems that they have taken up at our meetings?
Can you remind me of the context of that one?
They were concerned about when the sewer was going up the Scottsburn Road on that farm, as he could farm out to the end in case somebody came and built houses and stuff like that, how it
Yeah.
would be protected. He's just a new fellow that came
Yes.
and wants to expand.
That's right. Yeah.
What would this do to their
Yeah,
request?
through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, I think this is kind of, we do have if we don't create this new zone, we do have a piece later tonight about specifically rezoning their properties to address their, you know, to rural general to address their concern. But I think the better way to do it holistically, not just to address them, but to address their neighbors and other, would be that instead of community core in those areas, that when we created this new mixed use zone, that we would apply it to that stretch on the way into Scottsburn for those guys and their neighbors, to you know, remove that concern about that they have with their current community core zoning.
Okay. What's your wishes?
I would say that we should move in number 3.
Number 3? Create a new mixed-use zone? Okay. Motion was made, is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. Any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Right.
Count by nay, motion carried.
Agriculture and hobby farming. So we did hear concerns from some in the agricultural community about residential development next to their farms and the possibility that, you know, they might end up with land use conflicts that would impact their operations. So, you know, a desire for more protection for the agricultural uses. We did hear concerns about, in the draft documents, there's kind of 2 scales of livestock operations. There's a like commercial scale livestock, your chicken barns, your beef farms, all of that sort of thing, which is permitted primarily in the rural general zone. But then there's a smaller scale that we've created, the hobby livestock that's you know, intended to be more widely permissible. And there were some concerns about limiting the building size in that hobby livestock category, and request to actually remove the limit on size. So regarding actually agricultural protection and you know, increasing the protections for farming operations, I think, you know, to do that, the main way that you do that is place limitations on other types of development that could happen there in rural areas. whether that's rural subdivision, residential subdivisions, that kind of thing, especially residential subdivisions, because they're the ones that have wells, they're the ones that complain about smells and traffic and all of those sorts of things. That is certainly possible. It's done in many municipalities around the province. That being said, I think it was, the flip side of that is you're also restricting the farmer from doing those types of development as well. And I think we heard early on in our initial council discussions and planning advisory committee discussions was to not go down that route in these drafts. Again, in that kind of spirit of light touch and not regulating overly heavily. So I think in that spirit, we'd recommend that maintain the course, that option one, maintaining the current approach to agricultural protection. But it's certainly an option to more broadly limit other uses in areas around farms and especially residential.
What's the wishes? You want to maintain the current approach?
Sure.
Gordon?
Don't know if you turn it off. I would certainly say maintain the current approach. I think it seems to have found a happy place with farmers, I think, which we didn't do when we did this 50 years ago. So I don't think we want to vary from that. If there was a real good reason to, but if we go with number 2 there, increase the protection by limiting other uses, especially residential development in rural areas, that affects farmers, especially those nearing retirement age, where all of their money has been poured into their farm over the years. And the only thing they have to retire on is the value of that farm. But if they're only allowed to sell it as a farm, then they don't get the value of it that they deserve. The right way to do this is not for us to be limiting that. The province at some point or somebody needs to buy that out as a farm, with the farmer getting the value of it. It's no different than he would if people built houses on it. But then from then on, the farmer who bought it at that agricultural price can only sell it at the agricultural price. But to do it the way this is with number 2, you limit the saleability of that farm. Everybody would love to see it stay as a farm, but some farms simply aren't profitable. And it's not going to stay as a farm, and you limit the sale value of it for the current farmer. So I would be in favor of leaving things as they are on that one.
You want to make that a motion?
I will. Number 1.
Who's moved? Moved and seconded. Is there any question on it? Seeing none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Count on my nay. Motion carried.
Thank you. The second piece there is the hobby livestock operation definition. So again, we have those 2 categories, kind of the commercial livestock scale and then the hobby livestock scale. And hobby livestock is defined as operations that have animal housing, and that's specifically the housing, not necessarily your riding barns or that sort of thing, but the animal housing with a size up to 70 square meters, so 750 square feet. So you could do larger than that, and you just become that commercial livestock scale, and would need to be in an appropriate zone for that. So the request or the concern from the people we heard feedback about were on having that size, that feeling that people should have flexibility. However, we'll note that we created that separation, or we created that definition to allow or to have a smaller, less intensive version of livestock that could be appropriate to a wider range of places. It's not necessarily appropriate to allow commercial livestock chicken barns in the downtown of River John, maybe. Maybe it is, I don't know, but generally I don't expect to see it. But you might have someone who has a small barn with a couple of goats and a horse or whatever it may be. So we did create that category to allow, to have the ability to allow that use in a wider range of areas. That being said, so we would suggest maintaining the current approach, but if we feel that 70 square meters is not large enough, another option would be to increase that, or we could remove the size altogether. But again, that's kind of defeating the purpose of having this category.
And that's only, the hobby farms are in the restricted areas, right? It's in the community core area?
Yeah, so the hobby farm, that hobby livestock category, and this is specifically for livestock, like your cropping or whatever, we don't regulate that. But for like livestock barns, that use is permitted in every zone that permits residential. So rural general, rural commercial, community core,
Yeah.
or rural residential core, institutional, and that shoreline zone as well. So that hobby scale is widely permitted again, which is partly why it's kind of restricted in its size. And then if you wanted to do something bigger than that, you certainly could if you were in the rural general zone.
Gordon Parker?
I know it's there for a reason, because otherwise, where you're not allowed to have a large beef farm, say, right in the middle of Lions Brook, although the ones that are there are fine, but if I want to start a new farm there, and there's a few fields, and there's restrictions that, no, this is a core community zone or whatever. So this allows people to have a few, chickens is always the one that comes up, whether they're gonna let me have my chickens or not, but it could be other livestock, and it might be a person has one horse.
Yep.
And they need a small barn to put it in, and so we're saying that that's fine in these various zones, all zones that you looked at there. If you let it get, I can see both sides. I can see the small farmers saying, well, geez, why are you limiting me? I want another, I'm gonna put another barn up to have something or other in it, why you got this limit on the number of buildings or the size of the buildings, and but if we don't have that, then it becomes, a lot of farms start small and get big and bigger. And so I'm in favor of having restrictions. Whether 70 is the right number or not, I have no idea. A lot of farms in Victor County now are pretty small farms. They're farming on an acre or two, but they're growing intensively in greenhouses and in small fields, and then selling it at the farmer's market and whatnot. So there's a lot more of those farms than we used to have. So I don't want to put them out of business, but most of them are in the rural general area. The ones with the hobby farms are usually more in the more urban areas. And is 70 a common figure for the other planning you've done, or what? I have no idea to judge whether 70 is enough, or should it go to 100,
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. I don't think there's any magic to that number. It's a, that's specifically to the livestock housing, like, so the actual livestock barn, and again, doesn't apply to things like if you have a horse riding rink or arena or whatever it may be. I don't think there's any magic to that number. It's big enough to allow a couple animals, but at the same time, I'm no farmer, and my knowledge of animal barn needs is desktop based. So if anyone has the experience to tell me otherwise, I have no problem increasing that number.
But in the work that you've done for other municipalities, is 70 a common figure, or is it
Yeah, I would-
150, or?
I would say in that range.
Okay.
It varies from municipality to municipality. Well, and actually what historically has been done, you see in a lot of municipalities, is to do it on the basis of animal units. 100 chickens is one animal unit, and a cow is one animal unit, and if you're more than X number of animal units, then you're intensive. Well, what happens when the cow has a baby? Are you now in an intensive livestock operation? Who's coming out to count my chickens, right? So we're trying to get away from that, and so trying to find the number that works, I think. But
Did we hear a lot of resistance to 70?
we heard a couple of comments from people who were, one or two or three, I would say, that were concerned that it was too small, or that any limit was too much. But I think as you well said there, I think a limit is necessary, but I wouldn't be opposed, I wouldn't recommend against increasing it.
Deputy Warden.
That's the question. 70, what size building would that be?
That's 70 square,
Roughly.
that's roughly, what is that, 750 square feet roughly?
750?
I think it's 10 point something, and let's see, that's, let me get my calculator out here. 750 divided, be like a 20 by 37 foot building, if you want to think of
Yeah.
it that way.
Thank you.
2-car garage.
What's your wishes? You want to leave it as is, or do you want to increase the size of the building, or take the size of the building off?
But that, it's the total size of the buildings, is it?
Of the
The 70
animal
is-
housing.
Yeah, it
building.
could be 3 smaller barns or 1 big barn or whatever. I guess I'd be in support of increasing it to 100, since we did hear from some people, and I don't think 100's going to be a big industrial farm at all, for sure.
Okay, did you want to make that a
I'll
motion?
make it a motion, see where it goes.
Okay, it's moved, is there a seconder? It's moved and seconded. Any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor, signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Count aye, nay. Motion carried, so we'll increase that to 100.
Okay, next one was residential density. So we have a request from a developer who's working on a 28 to 30 unit development in Abercrombie. He wanted zoning, he wanted the community core zone to allow that development. Looking at his property, it is actually already community core. So that's all fine and good, except that zone allows up to 8 units on a lot as of right, and if you want to do more than 8, you have to go through a development agreement process, which is more involved. It's a public process and it comes to council. So, well, he does have a pathway under his current zone that's proposed. It is more onerous. One of the things in reviewing this request is kind of realizing that in our current draft, there really isn't a zone that allows, kind of uncapped number of dwellings without that development agreement process. There is no streamlined zone for larger residential developments. And you are seeing those larger residential developments, those 20, 30 size, and I don't necessarily think you want to be going through a development agreement for every one of those. Again, it is a process. It comes to you, it comes to council, it goes to the public, and that can take time and takes your time as well. So I think we probably should have a zone that allows larger developments without that extra step of a development agreement, and certainly the community core as the zone that is applied to service communities and is applied to would be an appropriate one for that. So option 1 is to maintain the current approach where it's up to 8 permitted and a development agreement above that, or to amend that zone to permit more units without a development agreement. And I think that community core zone is a good place to do that.
Mr.
Get a
Cameron.
definition of a unit?
So dwelling unit would be a self-contained, let me be precise here. Dwelling unit means one or more habitable rooms within a dwelling designed, occupied, or intended for use by one or more individuals as an independent and separate housekeeping establishment in which cooking, sleeping, and sanitary facilities are provided for the exclusive use of such individual or individuals. So at its most basic, you're looking at a kitchen, a bathroom, and at least one room. Or,
Individual talking about an apartment building, or?
I believe this one is, this is Blair. Yeah, and
It's like those Paul Quinn has out there in West Road.
I don't think it's mobile home because he knows that we have a mobile
Yeah. I think this one's semis. Oh, it's modular, okay. Yeah.
Not like the condos up by the golf course, is it? It's not condo units like that.
No, like, well, sort of, but like, they're then common, like, they're modular.
Oh,
Well, there, the person had come about, another project in Lions Brook as well. Um, So they're in the, I mean, they're in also in like the East Cut kind of game, so, they could be into, smaller or medium-sized apartment buildings and stuff like that as well, but
okay.
we haven't really gone anywhere with this project yet, we just sort of said how many units they plan to do. But what we've seen from this person in the past are either mobile home apartments, which are covered under mobile home bylaws.
It's not like the like the Quins on,
No.
Western Road.
No, that wasn't the intention before.
Yeah.
But it-
The fourplex.
Yeah.
But by definition, it could be a fourplex or an eightplex.
Yeah, and
Fourplexes, eightplexes, it could be an apartment building with hallways inside, things like that.
Okay.
And I think through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, as much as this is arising from a specific landowner's request, I think, the suggestion here isn't necessarily about that landowner so much as it is about the fact that what it's flagged for us in this landowner's request is that there isn't really a zone that easily allows this, so it could be a fourplex, it could be the eightplex, it could be a small apartment building. We just don't have the drafts don't really have a clean way of accommodating that currently, so.
Yeah, thanks. So we've had a variety of different types of multi-unit projects that have come and that are coming down the pipe. They varied everywhere from, I'll exclude mobile home parks because we have a separate bylaw that deals with those. But we've had large multi-units like the apartment building on East River Road. We've had projects come through like the one that had been proposed in Alma with a whole bunch of single plexes or duplexes on one lot, but not through a traditional subdivision. So single lot, up to, that was going to be 28 units. And then we've had other ones where, it might be 3 30-unit apartment buildings on one site. And then we've had others that, we have lots of, fourplexes and lots of these, and then some of these eightplexes, some sixplexes in Abercrombie. So, and then we've also got other bare land condo developments proposed right now that are, and out there that are, for all intents and purposes, individual homes, but they just happen to be on a bare land condo instead of through traditional subdivision. So in terms of the dwelling units, it could be anything from, houses to big apartment buildings, to duplexes, to fourplexes, eightplexes, standalone tiny homes. There are a whole variety of different ways this could come through. But the trick for us as a development authority would be to confirm the number of dwelling units per site, and then making sure that all the different structures that are proposed will adhere to our minimum setbacks, our minimum, lot finishes, things like that.
Mr. Cameron?
So how do you distinguish these days between a modular unit and a mobile home? Because the mobile homes aren't mobile anymore. They don't come with wheels on them like the old days. So if I had 30 acres, what's the difference between me putting, 30 modular units on it or 30 mobile things I buy from Kent?
Yeah, we do have definitions in our mobile home bylaw, so they wouldn't necessarily have to have wheels, but they have to be permanently affixed to the ground through some sort of a foundation or slab.
Lots of mobile homes are like that now too.
Yeah, I think we'd have to refer back to the mobile home bylaw and see whether or not that needs any updating, but I think in the spirit of what we're looking at here, our fixed structures end up looking like something with a frost wall foundation, something to that effect. We've got a defined definition in our mobile home bylaw.
So is that where this comes into play here?
No, it's a separate bylaw altogether.
No, I realize that, but for this, these would have foundations?
I don't
These
think
units?
that's defined in our dwelling units.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, the current, like the land use bylaw is defined, doesn't necessarily tie it to foundations. Yeah, and certainly the line is getting blurred more and more. You know, off-site construction is a pretty common technique, and the traditional mobile home, as you know, as you know it, in the 60s and 70s, that kind of thing, they still exist out there, but they're not. They don't get built because codes don't allow them anymore. That, you know, the very traditional mobile home. So what's built these days in terms of mini homes, modular homes, is approaching a standard dwelling, just built elsewhere and brought out. But I'm trying to find the mobile home park bylaw right now, and I can't.
So a mobile home is defined as any vehicle or similar portable structure, an extension thereof having no integral foundation other than wheels, jacks, skirting, so designed or constructed to permit occupancy for year-round dwelling purposes. Doesn't really meet the definition the way they're built today.
There you go.
This bylaw was adopted in 1971.
It's probably a bylaw that we should be revisiting, so.
We can put that in our recommendations yeah, at the end of this.
You don't want the two in conflict.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, Warden?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to where my brother Dave, when he was with us here, and his argument here was always on lot sizes. So when it says on a lot in a community core, well, 8 units on a 50-acre lot is a different thing than on a half-acre lot. Then you're basically talking about apartment buildings. So when it says 8 units on a lot, it doesn't refer to the size of the lot at all then?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, not currently. There's a minimum lot size, but if you met that minimum lot size as drafted, the number of units, it would, you know, as long as you meet that threshold, it doesn't change the number of units. So that is also another option that we could do, is that above that 8, you know, you can have more as, you know, quote unquote, as of right, dependent on your lot size. And then if you had a small lot and you wanted more than 8, then you'd have to go through that that development agreement process. You know, we could have it kind of tiered like that. Permitted on larger lots, and then if you want a small lot and dense, then you're having that more intensive
'Cause,
process.
I'm trying to think of what's the downside of this for the neighbors sometimes, you know,
Yeah.
if all of a sudden, let's say it was in Abercrombie and Larry gets a call saying, what are they putting up in the middle of it? We got a bunch of nice homes on this street here, a nice community and everything, and somebody's gonna move in and put, well, instead of 8 units on, they're gonna put 100 units on. And they only got a fairly small lot, so the only way to do that's to go up. And, you know, are we getting ourselves into a situation where we're allowing somebody what they want, but it might be detrimental to the community overall, or detrimental to what they want in their community? I'm not suggesting this is gonna happen in Abercrombie or anywhere, but it could happen if we say you can put more than 8, there's no number on there, just more than 8, without knowing the lot size. Seems you're leaving it wide open to, you know, that somebody can come in and put up a large apartment building in a neighborhood maybe where it doesn't fit. I don't know, I'm just trying to wonder if there is a downside to simply saying, build as many as you want, where you want, you know.
Logan?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think a mechanism that we already have built that this feeds into is, you know, somebody wants to, you know, if you were only, say we stick with what we currently have and you're only allowed to do 8 lots in the community, 8 units per lot in the community core zone, you can always go through our subdivision process, carve out the lots, and the good thing is that tied to that, and to something else that we're going to review, is the number of lots per road and things like that. But the good thing there is that it forces developers at a certain threshold to change over to looking at different road standards, different access standards, things like that, so we can make sure that there's safe access, egress from the properties, those types of things. So if you have a humongous property, 100-acre lot, it doesn't say that you can only, it doesn't really say that you can only subdivide, or you can only have 8 units on that lot. It means take the 8 units that you have and then subdivide off additional lots there and build 8 more as you go, that kind of thing. So we do have, that's one way that we could handle that and control the growth a little bit more and make sure that it's all broken out the right way. I think otherwise you end up in a situation where you could have sprawling development on these giant lots, and it could get very challenging for emergency vehicles to get in and out and stuff like that in the case of emergencies.
Ronnie?
Yeah, just, what does as of right, what's that mean?
Yeah, that's a good question, through you, Mr. Chair. So, so you get your land use bylaw. It's got a set of very, specific standards. And as of right development would be development that meets those standards. You come in, you talk to the development officer, you show your plans, and they meet that land use bylaw. They're under that 8 units. They're meet the lot size. They meet the setbacks. Development officer says, check, 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 check. Here's your permit. As of right, you have. If you meet the standards, you have the right. There are other tools available to us, like development agreements, where instead of having specific standards, where it says, if you want to do this type of development, you need to put together a proposal. That proposal is reviewed with the public, and more importantly, it's reviewed with Planning Advisory Committee and Council looks at it against the general criteria, the big picture policy set out in the plan, and says yay or nay. You don't necessarily have that right. It's a somewhat discretionary process on council's part. So that's really the main difference there.
Do we want option number 1 or option number 2, where we can up it from 8? I know these developments are becoming more common, especially in the community cores, because you have water and sewer, and it makes it a lot easier for build. In my area, there's a couple of these developments, and there's a couple that they're looking at doing, right? So, and they're looking at 12 units. So if we stay with 8, then they'd have to go through the subdivision agreement and things like that. So they have to build your own to a certain standard and everything like that. So, and the ones that are there now, I have ones there that have 8 units, and there's no issue with the ins and outs, things like that. But they don't get garbage collection on top.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Warden Barker.
Yeah. I don't have a concern with us allowing more than 8 units on a lot, as long as the lots are big enough. So we're not squeezing people onto trying to get 12 or 15 or whatever into a very compact, so could we put, say, a minimum lot size for if you want to go, say, to 16 or 12 or whatever, so we had you can't on a half-acre land put a whole lot of houses. Like I say, the only way to go is up. Yeah. And there becomes concern in the community if you start packing too many in, as to what works for their community. I think we have to allow expansion, but I think there has to be enough land base for that expansion to take place, without overcrowding. So could we work out something that said if you want to go to 12, you got to have a minimum size? You want to go to 20, you got to have minimum size. So size has something to do with it, not just right now it's open. You more than 8 units, could be 20 units, whatever we want. I'd just rather see some numbers on it so that we're not cramming people in too close in an area.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, we certainly could do that. Yeah,
Okay.
that's an approach as well. Kind of an option 3.
Okay. Do you want to make a motion on that?
I will. Is that somebody looking for you, Wayne? Yeah, okay. Okay, I'll make the motion that we ask Upland to come back with, a recommendation on more than 8 units per lot, but depending on the size of the lot. Hopefully that's clear enough.
Any questions, or is there a seconder? I'll second. It's moved and seconded. Any questions on it? Hearing none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
All right,
Count my name. Motion carried. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
How's everybody doing? Just checking in.
surviving.
All right, keep going. All right, RVs. We heard concern about habitation of recreational vehicles in the municipality, particularly in the Caribou area, and concerns about safety as these as year-round dwellings. And then also questions about why recreational vehicles and travel trailers are not included in the definition of campground. So on that latter one, we actually have a separate land use definition, RV park. I think it's more than 3 RVs on a lot. And we did that separately so that they could be regulated differently than, say, a couple tents and, campground, that style. So that is actually addressed, it's just in a different category. The bigger question is on that habitation piece. Certainly, we could have provisions in there that limit the year-round habitation of RVs, but I do have concerns with that in terms of, well, sometimes these structures, they may not be built to the same houses and or same standards as housing, that kind of thing. Sometimes it is an RV is better than nothing, and RV's safer than a tent in that sense, and for some people that is what is available to them. It's also one of those things that the enforcement of it can be quite challenging. Where's the line between habitation versus, I've been visiting my in-laws for the past 2 months and have been staying in the RV as the guest house. So that is a challenge on that side as well. So I think I certainly appreciate the concern on that one, but also given that, would recommend that we do not regulate RVs until they become an RV park.
Okay. Any questions? Gordon?
Turn that on. I'm in favor of what's there. We brought up here one time, I don't know how many years ago, about trying to regulate some people living in RVs, and it was becoming sort of a bad spot partway out toward River John. I think that, there was a lot of things going on that weren't as they should be, I guess I'd say. But when we mentioned it here one night about looking into that, we got a lot of flack from the public. And it was right along the lines of what you said, Ian. It's better than a tent. And if that's all you've got, are you gonna say to people, no, we're gonna kick you out of your RV? You go to Viola's place, or that's what what life is for that person at that time. And if we can't provide better housing, then who are we to tell them that you can't stay in that now, but start causing problem for the neighbors, which is what it was doing at that time. Whether it's to do with sewer or whether it's to do with animals, I think was part of the problem at that time. Those are other problems that have to be looked at otherwise. But as far as a place to live, I don't think it's up to us to say that you can't live in an RV if that's what you've got. So I would be in favor of number 1. I can make that a motion if you want, Mr. Chair.
It's moved.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. Any questions on it? Just on that, I think a lot of people, I know there's one in my area that's bought a lot of land, and they have an RV, and they move it down there, and then they enjoy that for a couple of weeks, and they move it somewhere else. So, they purchase that land, it's their own land to use, as long as they're using it for their own purpose, like for what the land use is there for. So I'm in agreement. I don't see us regulating the RVs. And it's a sad thing if somebody has to live in an RV over the winter, but like the warden said, it's better than being out in the cold in tent, so. Okay, all those in favor, say by saying aye.
Aye.
Count by nay. Motion carried.
Signage. The current draft has some list of prohibited signs. You know, a lot of them are things related to safety and everything, but one of them is signs painted on, attached to, or supported by a tree, stone, cliff, or other natural object. We had a resident who objected to this, noting that many of the cottage areas might have a sign, you know, nailed to the tree at the end of the road or that kind of thing, and that's part of the rural context and should be allowed to continue. You know, that's a pretty common standard that's been carried through plans in Nova Scotia since the 80s, I think. It's, you know, presumably concerned about the health of the tree and that sort of thing, and not encouraging damaging it. But at the same time, as this resident noted, it is a practice in many areas. I don't have a particularly plan recommendation one way or another. It doesn't matter to me as a planner. It's really what you expect out of the, you know, out of your community, or what you expect for your community. So we could maintain that prohibition on attaching signage to natural objects, or we could remove it.
I might have to speak to this. My organization attaches signs to a lot of trees in the rural community, and if that goes away, so do the signs. So you might want to think about that, and I might recluse myself from this. So I'm in favor of attaching things to signs to trees.
Well, I agree. It's been around for forever, and for the few that are out there, I don't think it's causing much of a problem, so. Somebody want to make a motion? Bonnie?
Have a comment?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Perhaps there's room for an option number 3, prohibit commercial signage on natural objects, so not to interfere with private farms and cottages. It's just a suggestion. Thank you.
No, we're not commercial, we're government.
So your suggestion was to add a third option, and it was commercial signage.
To prohibit commercial signs.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Thank you.
I think most of the commercials are put up on posts and things like that. They're a lot more professional than some people.
Depends if you consider solid waste.
Commercial.
I'm sorry, by commercial I meant companies, businesses.
Businesses. and
Thank you.
stuff like that, yeah.
Profitable businesses. For profit, yeah.
Can I ask Ian a question?
Yes.
Enforcement. See that as a huge challenge. Other than if you get a complaint, you go and it's non-compliant, you take the sign down, but what's your experience with feedback from municipalities on the enforcement of this? Is it easily done, or is it something that you put in your bylaw and you just turn a blind eye to it if it happens, I guess?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think in my experience, it's almost entirely complaint-based. You put it in and it's there until someone calls with one that's a problem, and you go out and look at it, and you take it down if you need to, sort of thing. So in most cases, it goes unused until there's an issue. The other challenge is that a lot of signage that people have problems with ends up being in the road right away, the provincial road right away, and then it's not your place to take the signs down one way or another. Yeah, I would say it would. I don't know a municipality in Nova Scotia that's takes a proactive approach to this. It's certainly all I see is complaint based.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Warden Parker.
I would be in favor of what Bonnie mentioned about commercial signs versus, yeah, there's a lot of people in campgrounds, camp areas and stuff who have signs on trees and various things, but, you know, they may not follow it, we may not be able to enforce it, but the fact it's there, you know, will hopefully limit, you know, the number of signs that I don't know how many it is, but generally the larger business, like somebody said here, pay a lot of money to put, heavy posts, steel posts, wood posts or whatever in, put their sign up of good quality, because they want their business to look good. But there are some that, will just nail it onto the closest tree. So I'm not against, having it for commercial. I don't think we should have it, well, we can never regulate it for, home use, I don't think, but, is that the only thing we have on signage, Ian, or is that the one that you're looking at making changes on?
Yeah, there's other things in there. This was the one that we heard the concern about and a request for a change. So there's
Is
there's prohibitions on signage that could be confused for stop signs, or that's signage that obstructs vision and that sort of thing. Like there are other prohibited signs, but this is the one that we heard the complaint about.
The one that, I've heard for a long time is why, and maybe we don't have a way to regulate it neither, why signs are left long after a restaurant or business is closed, 10, 12 years later, sign's still there until it falls down the bushes. In the meantime, tourists are chasing around looking for what it says on the sign. A sign right back there said that if I go so far, I'm gonna come to a eating place or a sleeping place or whatever. Are we able to regulate that or not? I mean, the fact that, I know it's too late to add it now, but is that something that we can regulate? Because again, a lot of times the business goes broke,
Yeah.
and anybody that's answerable is gone, or, but sometimes they're not, and a little nudge, oh yeah, I'll take that down, I guess I never even thought of it type of thing, but it is, looks bad on our county, but it's also, I know if I'm away somewhere and see a sign, well, I figure that must be there, I'm gonna follow down that road till I find it. And, that to me is a big a detrimental thing about signs.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I have certainly seen that in land use bylaws, that, signs that advertise businesses that no longer, or haven't existed in the last X number of years, as a type of prohibited sign as well, so we could add that.
Just on that though, if they're on provincial public highway right away, then we have no regulation at all. And that's where most of these signs are. Very few signs that we're talking about are off the highway right away, so. Yeah, I know the province tried to regulate this back a number of years ago, and the 11th hour, they pulled it because of the public outlash, right? So, I think we're talking about something that we really don't have any control over. And the other thing is the policing of it, like, do we have the staff to police it, or we don't have the authority to police it either if it's on the highway right away. So a lot of the signs that I know at Blue Acres there, that's on government property, right? So that's, and people complain about those signs, but you can't touch those because they're provincial owned land, so. To me, I think we should leave signage out of the land use bylaw, so that's my opinion. Warden. Ronnie?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm in agreement that we shouldn't. I mean, right now, we have 2 providers for our internet that's on telephone poles and trees all over the county, so, I think that, I think it'd be an impossible to police, and I think if we take them down today, they'll probably be back up within a week, so, to me, it's, and so I'll make a motion that we do number 2.
I'll second that motion.
Let's move and second. Any question? Seeing none, all those in favor, say by saying aye.
All right.
Count by nay. Nay. 1 nay. Motion carried.
All right, thank you. Kennels. So currently in the draft documents allow kennels, which is overnight boarding of animals in rural, commercial, and industrial zones. And then animal care, which is, vets, grooming, daycare services, that kind of thing, in rural, general, community core, general commercial, rural commercial, industrial, and commercial recreation. So more widely permitted because they don't have that overnight component. We did hear from a resident who wants to see kennels and animal care permitted in all zones, with the exception of conservation and institutional areas. Kennels themselves, have a potential for noise and impact. Animal care, we do allow fairly widely already, and then even actually beyond that, you can do it as a home-based business, as long as you live there. So generally, I think we recommend maintaining that current draft approach. The rural general zone, those zones are fairly wide-ranging, allows ability to do these things, but we could expand where those uses are allowed within the bylaw if you desire.
I'll make a motion, Earl, do you have something? No, I'll make a motion that we go with number 1.
We maintain the current approach. Okay. So is there a seconder? Seconded by Bonnie. Any question? Seeing none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Count by nay. Motion carried.
Solar panels. So in the current draft, we allow commercial solar panels based on the zone, and then accessory solar panels, so solar panels that are on a building or beside a building and powering it in all zones. However, for off-building accessory panels, so not on a roof and not as a standalone commercial farm, there is in the draft a restriction on the size to 10 square meters, 100 square feet-ish. We had a comment from a resident that notes that this is too small for their purposes. They are looking for closer to 100 square meters. In reviewing that and looking at the size of systems today that people are using, for accessory purposes, just to power their home and that sort of thing, or business, we can see the need for this larger area. So we recommend, we could, option 1, keep it as is at 10 square meters, or option 2, increase it. And in that case, I think that 100 square meters would be reasonable. And we recommend option 2.
Earl?
I agree with option 2, because I don't agree with putting solar panels on a roof. And if you set it beside your house, it's gonna be just as much as whatever it takes for the roof. So it has to be the same, or roughly the same as what would be on your roof. So
Yeah.
I would go with option 2 for sure.
Move second. Any question? Hear none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Count by nay. Motion carried.
Oops. Lot plan requirements. Okay, so in the administrative application section of the land use bylaw, the things that are required for an application, there is a requirement for a lot plan that shows various details about the proposed development. The location of proposed structures, distance from lot lines, height of the structure, that sort of thing. The information that the development officer, at a minimum, is going to need to ensure compliance with the land use bylaw. There was a request from a resident who suggested that this should be limited to just having the footprint and the distance and any adjacent structures, so not the height, not where the driveways are supposed to be, that kind of stuff, those extra details. And certainly appreciate, this is a little bit of extra effort. However, in many cases, this is the information that the development officer is going to need to make sure you comply with the bylaw. And rather than have a situation where the development officer, gets a basic lot plan and then has to go back and forth with the applicant for more information and slow down the application that way. As much as it's a little more work up front for the applicant, it actually, I think, in the end, cuts down on application timelines if all the information that the development officer can need is right there up front. So we recommend option 1, maintain the current draft approach to lot plans, the information that's required, or the alternative is to reduce that information on the upfront application.
Again, I'm going to agree with option 1. Actually, I just put a driveway into our farm, and I needed to do all of these drawings anyway to get it, the permit for TIR, so you have to do it anyway. So you might as well do it for this as well as that, so I'm okay with option one.
Okay, it's moved. Moved, seconded. Any question? Hearing none. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Counted by nay. Motion carried.
I think that would increase the time frame a lot.
Yes, that's certainly our concern. Kind of related to that is in the land use bylaw, there's a whole list of additional studies or plans that the development officer may require in situations where they're necessary to confirm compliance with the land use bylaw. And I emphasize the may on that. It's not a must or shall. We did have a developer who was concerned about the ability to require these extra studies, certainly worried that, developments could be studied to death and place a whole extra burden and red tape on developments, and that section should be removed. And we certainly could do that. That's option 2, or option 1 is to maintain that section, and that's what we'd recommend. Again, it is a may, and to some degree that depends on the development officer to ask for studies only when they're really essential to meet that requirement for the bylaw. But again, it's helpful for people to know that that is a possibility, and sometimes you do need that extra study to confirm that you have a survey, that those measurements are precise, those setback measurements, or that the stormwater is dealt with, or whatever it may be. So we recommend option 1, keep that requirement.
Warden? Hello? Ron?
Thinking that through, so like in the community core, if say somebody comes, and we've said we're going to allow more than 8 units, and somebody comes and says we're going to propose 150 units, and I guess I'm speaking to their additional expense, when they apply for a driveway permit, the Department of Transportation would have the right to ask for a traffic impact study on them, correct?
Yeah.
But that's been our experience with them.
Yeah, typically, the rule of thumb that they're using with us is 100 units, whether they're houses or
Yeah.
apartment units, or like that.
So they pay, so I don't think this is out of line to say to a developer that you're going to require additional study. It may not be our study, it may be environment or a provincial department. I guess that's my point.
The problem, sorry, not to be a turn, we just, the province will also oftentimes require, stormwater management plans anyway. So between stormwater management and traffic and intersection design, the province already requires these on, 98% of our roads, if we're larger, medium, and large scale developments like that.
And I think, sorry.
Warden Parker will go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At some of our meetings, not all of them, there was concern brought up, at least 2 I know of, but concern that the development officer was unnecessarily slowing them down with too much red tape, as was mentioned here. So I don't think we want to slacken up on the rules any, or have less stringent rules. There are companies out there right now that would like us to, cut back on our rules to do with the roads and whatnot, and who's responsible for paying for them and that type of thing. Climate Change Committee's meeting again tonight, and they're running into things that, are people would like to get around the rules, just because it's going to save you some money. If you're a developer and you're going to save some money, you're going to do that. But I think this county needs to stick to the rules, treat everybody the same, but stick to the rules and not back off because somebody doesn't like it. But on the other side of the coin is those who feel that the development officer is treating them unfairly. And they want to know if there's any recourse for them at all. Is there an appeal is basically what they're asking for, if they can't seem to come to a conclusion with the development officer, is the, maybe somebody in this room knows, maybe the appeal is to council, I don't know, or is there an appeal process so that, because it's the two sides of the coin, those who don't want to follow the rules and are trying just to cheap out a little bit, and those who truly feel they're not being treated fairly by the development officer. So I don't know, maybe you know the answer to that, Brian. Is it council that they can appeal to, or can
So,
they?
yeah, so any decision that the development officer makes, barring it, I guess as of right, is appealable, right, to council. There is processes there.
Okay.
Council can uphold the decision of the development officer, go against the development officer, at which point that can be appealed to the Utility Review Board is the next court. And then ultimately it probably can go to the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia. So there is an
is a
appeal
process.
process, but
Okay.
it becomes an administrative process and it's very defined type thing. So.
Because we did hear that some at some of the meetings. I know at least two of them and maybe more, feeling that they were held up by the, I don't know, whatever they use, pickiness or whatever they call it, the development officer. But as long as they know that there is an appeal process, I think is important. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So what's your wishes? To maintain the current draft? It's moved by the warden. Second by the deputy warden. Any questions? Not seeing any. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Count by nay. Motion carried.
All right, we're getting really close to the end here. And a few nitty-gritty things. One is automobile parking area standards. So there is in the bylaw basic standards for parking areas that are larger than 4 parking spots. So these don't apply to smaller, driveways and that kind of thing. There is a requirement in there that's those larger parking lots have to be surfaced with a stable surface that is treated to prevent the raising of dust and/or loose particles. Someone raised a concern about that dust or loose particles that graveled parking lots can have that happen. Certainly, the intent is to allow gravel parking lots, so that's a fair comment. There's a requirement that there's no more than 2 entrances or exits from a lot to any one road. People raised, again, concerns about large lots with large frontages that you might actually have more than that too, especially if you have a farm where the house is from one and the farm with the easy access for tractors has 2 or whatever it may be. And then finally, there's a requirement that driveways be arranged, again, for these lots that are bigger than 4 spaces, not for individual driveways, but these bigger ones that they're arranged that vehicles have to be able to forward out instead of backward out. Regarding the stable surfaces, we recommend amending the wording to remove that, to keep the stable surfaces requirement, but remove that piece about dust and loose particles, just to make it clear that gravel is permitted.
Okay. Okay, motion made by Earl to amend the wording for stable surfaces, which includes gravel and asphalt.
It would allow then for, because many of our yards and stuff of business stuff are gravel in the countryside, if you required them to pave them all, first they'd have to pose. So, the cost of pavement today, but now I know there are some dangers when there's too many entranceways onto the road, but here it says, does it say limit, does it, or?
We're just dealing with that first
Oh, I'm
one.
on the wrong one, but okay, I'm fine with the gravel then.
Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Count by nay. Motion carried.
Okay, yeah, the next one is the number of driveways. So again, it's currently in the draft limited to 2 per road, per lot. We could keep that. We could entirely remove the limitation, or we could amend the wording to increase the number, and we would suggest option 3, and doing it based on the amount of frontage, so that you'd have a, 2 for the first 30 meters of lot frontage, and then you could have more driveways depending on how big your lot is, basically to allow it on those larger lots.
So move that one, certainly agree with it.
I'll second that.
Let's move and second it. Just on that, like, we have no bearing on approving these driveways through, it's done by the provincial government, right?
There are two approvals. You have a provincial approval and a municipal approval. But like, we could approve a driveway in theory, and then the province come back and say, actually it doesn't meet site plan requirements.
No, it has to be
So
the
they have to get two
condition.
approvals if they're actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're saying we'll amend the wording for the number of drives based on the size of the lot.
Correct.
So, and what size will we be looking at?
I would suggest 2 for the first 30 meters of frontage, which is the minimum frontage in
Oh,
a rural
yes.
zone, and then 1 for every 30 beyond that.
Yeah, because in the country, there's a lot of
Yeah.
farmland there that people want access to their wood lots and things like that, so,
Yeah.
okay? Was that, anybody make a
Do we
motion?
get a,
Did you make a motion? We only had we didn't have the motion.
Okay, I'll make the motion.
You make the motion to amend the wording for the number of driveways based on road frontage. Okay? Moving second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Come by nay, motion carried.
then finally, that exit direction piece. We recommend keeping the current requirement to have space on the lot for cars to front out, rather than, then again, this is for larger parking lots, not individual driveways or that kind of thing. Rather than having large parking lots where people have to back out into the road.
So move number one.
Let's move in second. Any question? I have one,
Sorry?
I have one, like, so you have to exit, you have to be able to drive it, right? But there's people that will back out, right, so,
You might still, yeah.
yeah, so, that's the only.
Can't control how people drive.
No, exactly. Okay, let's move in second. All those, and what are we talking about size of the lot for that?
This is larger than 4 parking spaces.
Larger than 4 parcels. Yeah. Okay. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Count by nay. Motion carried.
All right, industrial pre-zoning. So, in general, our approach in the draft has been to apply industrial zoning to existing industrial uses, recognizing that they're there. And then also in the Granton area, along the whole road there, in the vicinity of the tire plant, we have pre-zoned a whole stretch of land for industrial, including some properties that are not currently industrial. So an area that, could be people could be directed to for industrial development. There was a suggestion, and then outside of that, we've kept it to the bounds of existing industrial uses generally. There was a suggestion that those existing industrial uses, that we actually pre-zone a wider area around them to allow them, to expand easily. We have one option, which is to not do that and keep industrial zoning specifically to the uses where they exist now, or the other option is to indeed do that and kind of put a buffer of industrial zoning around existing industrial properties. I think industrial uses probably were one of the strongest reasons people wanted planning when we were out talking to people and having some control over where that goes. In general, I think, having willy-nilly expansion of industrial uses is kind of contrary to that concern that we heard from people. Certainly these areas, they could expand through a rezoning process. It would be a council process, a public process, and it is a little more effort, but at the same time, that is kind of, I think, a lot of what we heard from what people wanted as when it came to planning. So we recommend option 1.
I agree with that. That's the whole purpose of, if they want to change the zone, then they come to council. And these are bigger organizations, and they have the ability to do that. And these people aren't putting things up overnight either, so there are plans that they have to put in place, and I think the municipal council should be involved in that.
What was that motion?
Can be.
It's moved. Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. Any question? Seeing none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Count by nay, motion carried.
Okay, the very last topic-specific one is industrial zone setbacks and buffers. So we hear two things. One, so the industrial zone has setbacks from property lines. They're on the larger side compared to other zones. Again, recognizing, industrial is the thing that's potentially impactful and that people were concerned about. So it's, let me see here, it's just, in the industrial zone, it's 8 meters from the front property line, 20 from the rear, 10 from the side, and 20 from the flankage. So that's the other road on a corner lot. We heard a suggestion that those be reduced, especially in situations where you have an industrial property next to another industrial property. On the flip side of that, we heard a suggestion that there should be a 3-kilometer buffer between new heavy industrial uses and existing residential or recreation developments, that would be a standard buffer for new uses. So I guess for the setbacks, I guess I combined these in one, but it really should have been 2. I apologize for that, might confuse things here. Let's talk about the setbacks, I guess. Those setbacks are on the larger end, and the flanking, and I don't know how we ended up with 20 meters when the front one is 8, so we do suggest some adjustment to that. It complicates things a little bit to have it between, between different uses, like if reducing it next to another industrial use, but it could be done. So we do, I recommend adjusting that setback in the industrial zone.
Gordon?
I'm not just totally sure what we're talking about here.
Yeah, sorry, I confused that a little bit.
So with an industrial zone,
Yeah.
we're going to require a certain setback. There's a setback in there now, right?
Yeah.
And we're just increasing the setback, is it?
So in this case, it would be reducing it. So this would be the setback from the building to the property lines in that zone. The suggestion was to reduce those setbacks. We would definitely suggest reducing the flankage setback, which is currently 20 meters. That's if you're on a corner lot, you have your front lot line and the flankage lot line's the other road. It's 20 meters currently. We suggest reducing that. The other suggestion was to, if you're next to another industrial use, to reduce the setback between them, which could be done.
Between industrial uses?
Yeah,
From one to another could be closer.
yeah.
And then the last one says,
Yeah, so that was, sorry, I combined them as 2 kind of things here, but maybe we should ignore the third one for a second
ignore
here.
the third one for now and do it, okay. I don't have any problem with the, with the industrial setbacks, until you get to where they're closer to residential or recreational areas or whatever, but that's just the feeling I have anyway.
I guess what I'd say here is I don't have an issue with industrial against industrial and reducing those setbacks. And with regards to other setbacks, I think a lot of the industrial activities also are going to require environmental approvals as well as, and their setbacks are more extreme than those. So the industrial against industrial, I don't see an issue with lowering them, but I don't see why we would lower the ones, you know, if you're going up against another property, because it's usually at least 30 meters anyway, so.
Okay. Is there a motion? What's your wishes? You'll move to adjust the setbacks in industrial zone? Okay. It's moved and seconded.
Okay.
Any questions? Hearing none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye. Count my nay. Motion carried.
Okay. That's the topic specific. Now we have a couple specific zoning requests. We'll try and fly through them generally quick. So the first one is the gentleman in the lead up to Scottsburn there. I have to remind me of his name. I did talk to him, and it's late in the night, but this is in the Scottsburn Road on the way to Scottsburn. He has properties that are proposed to be community core, but they are commercial livestock operations, and he's concerned about the impact on that. So he requested that they be rezoned to rural general. We think that rezoning's appropriate. However, we did create that new mixed-use zone as part of the discussions earlier tonight, so I suggest rather than the rural general, actually that we put it in that mixed-use zone. He'd still get his livestock operation, but it would be, you know, using that zone that we created. I think this is a perfect situation for it. So I would recommend option 3.
Gordon?
I'm just trying to be clear on the difference of what this does for him now, where he wasn't in rural general, he was in the core, community core. So what does it do for him to be in this new mixed use that he was looking for, to be able to not have the limitations, I guess, of the community core?
Yeah, so the community core zone does not permit commercial livestock, which he is. Now, he would be protected as a non-conforming use.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't be a problem. The issue would be if he went to expand, he would run up against that zoning issue. So the community core, you know, would potentially limit any risk expansion that he might have. So a new zone would be, allow him to expand in the future. I think the mixed use, as we've discussed it, is kind of specifically for these transition zones between rural general, you know, very rural or very wide open, to these community core areas. You know, as I conceptualize it, I think we would allow commercial livestock in it, but not some of those heavier uses like certain industrial and aggregate related and stuff like that. So the new mixed use zone would allow him to, again, expand. It just wouldn't be as wide open for some of those other uses as the rural general would.
But as far as his farm goes, there'd be no more limitations on him than somebody in the rural general.
That would be the intent, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Just on that, if he was going to expand, you mean if he was going to
That's
buy
it.
a lot from a neighboring property?
Yeah, buy a lot for a neighboring property, or he decided he wanted to double the size of his operation, you know, build a new 10,000 chicken barn or whatever like that.
If he had a 100 acre lot
Yeah.
under that use,
Yeah.
could he not expand because that use is already?
So the Municipal Government Act protects non-conforming uses. They're allowed to continue, but they're not allowed to expand beyond the bounds they existed when they became non-conforming. So that would limit him,
Limited from
yeah, to
expansion.
become non-conforming would limit him.
Logan?
Thanks, Ian. This is more on the, through you, Mr. Chair. This is more on the mixed use. What proposed distance from the other neighboring uses do you see these fitting into? And does it bring it more in line with the restrictions of those community core, residential core areas in terms of unit counts allowed, those types of things? Is that the sort of idea for the mixed use?
Yeah, that it would be through you, Mr. Chair, sorry, that it would be more in line with the community core, community residential zones in terms of residential development density, that sort of thing. That it would be a little more rural, for lack of a better term, in terms of the wider range of uses that it allows, agricultural type uses, a wider range of commercial perhaps, but just maybe not those heaviest or heavier end of the scale in terms of industrial, in terms of heavy resource industry sort of thing.
And just as a follow-up, are we talking like 100 meters off the existing, a kilometer, 3 kilometers, like with the industrial, or do you have an idea on the range that you see elsewhere?
In terms of, through you, Mr. Chair, in terms of like buffer distances, or in like how we apply the zone, you mean?
How you apply the zone beyond the existing community cores and stuff like that?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I don't think it would be necessarily a magic number. I think, and maybe this is something where we'll make some proposals, and when we bring it back to council, you can make sure we got it right. But I wouldn't widely apply it in the sense that, again, we are kind of late in the game, and just willy-nilly changing zoning on people without their chance to review it might be challenging. But I would, this stretch of Scottsburn Road between, before you get to Scottsburn proper, would be a good, where we have it zone community core now. I think I would suggest putting those community core properties in this up until you get to Scottsburn proper. These other areas identified specifically by councillors, I'd suggest it as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll make a motion, but I do have a question before I make the motion on, Mr. Baddis is concerned that has the farm in Linesbrook, and he's in the community core.
Yep.
And under that zone, how far back, I think this is a question that he asked me anyway, is he zoned right back to the back end of his lot that's a mile back, or is it just a certain off-the-road frontage, is a certain lot size or whatever back?
Through you, Mr. Chair, generally I can't recall off the top of my head what his extent would be, and I can certainly look at it closer. If you remind me with an email tomorrow, I can look at it closer for him specifically. Typically, we try and keep a whole property in one zone. It just simplifies administration. You're not trying to, decide exactly where that line is on the ground. It lines up with the property lines. It's easy peasy. Sometimes if it's a very deep lot, we will cut it. We will split zone it for that, because it's a huge lot. But I don't know off the top of my head for him what the current context is.
So what would happen if it's in two PDIs, like he had different lots, one out front and then back?
Yeah.
Would the back one be qualify then under the same zone?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if you wanted to, I think we could do that. It's, at this point, it's easy enough to.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll get him to speak to you about that.
Yeah,
'cause
that would
was
be
a
helpful.
concern. Okay, so I will move that we go to number 3 to satisfy the gentleman in Scotsman.
Okay. Is there a seconder? Move and second. Any question? All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Count my nay. Motion carried.
Okay, next quick one here. This is a request from a developer who is planning an accessible townhouse development of 40-plus units in River John. Here it is on the map here. So most of River John is in the community core zone. He's right on the fringe. So the community core, the properties in front are community core, but his large property is currently drafted as rural general. I understand from Logan that he has applied for sewer. If you want to chime in.
Thanks, Ian. Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, this applicant, this development has been in the works for around a year. We've had them in for multiple meetings. They've applied for sewer servicing. We've reviewed a number of their site plans. So I think my understanding is that they're just looking to have that certainty in the investment that they've already put in and that they're already looking to finance at this point. The project does meet the sort of community spirit of what we're looking for and sort of that density. So
We had the conversation, and then we pointed them in the direction of Ian and Upland as well. So, yeah, they've already advanced the process to the point of taking out their servicing permit applications and showing us some drawings and things like that.
So in that case, we'd recommend putting it in the community core.
Ronnie, did you want to make a motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we change the proposal zone to community code. That's what he's requesting, correct?
He's, through you, Mr. Chair, he's basically requesting that his development be recognized, and I think the way to do that would be to put it in the community core zone.
Is there a seconder?
I'll second.
Moving second. Any question? Not hearing any. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Count by nay. Motion carried.
Next one is the owners of Northumberland Diesel Limited. They have an existing, I believe it's a machine shop, shown there on Highway 6. And they are requesting that they be put, they're currently in the draft in the rural general zone. They are requesting to be in the rural commercial zone to more accurately reflect the activities on their property and also be consistent with their neighbor who is also in that rural commercial C3 zone, which looking at their existing operation seems consistent, and we would recommend this change.
Ward,
I'm just wondering what's behind the request. What's the gain from going from rural, is it rural general to rural commercial? What, it must allow them to do something that they can't do under rural general? I thought rural general pretty well gave you everything.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, rural general is pretty wide open. There's a couple of commercial uses. Let me see here. Commercial service and repair shops, indoor shooting ranges, wholesale. Where's industrial? Does it change industrially? Nope. Wholesale's the main one. Indoor shooting ranges, commercial schools, so that'd be like training schools, that sort of things. Heavy equipment sales and rentals. That's it there. So there, that is in the C3, but not necessarily but not in the G1.
Okay, there must be something to it. It doesn't matter what it is. I just
Yeah.
didn't know the difference. Wondered what you're gaining by going from one to the other, but that must be the gain is on sales, maybe. I'm not against it at all if it will help business in the county. And
and what area is that in again?
Three Brooks,
Three Brooks?
yeah.
Or-
I
yes,
think
Three
it's on
Brooks.
the number 6, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's all the grant.
Is moved. Is there a seconder? Moving second. Any question? Hearing none. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
All right,
Count by nay. Motion carried.
All right, 4 left here.
I said you told us we were near the end a while
Yeah.
ago.
Four zoning requests. Okay, so this is a property that is in Abercrombie. It is an existing land lease community. We had, when we were applying the shoreline zone, we thought the road there was a private road and that it was a residential development, so by our shoreline criteria, we put it in the shoreline zone. We missed that it was a land lease community. The owner has requested the rural commercial zone to better reflect that existing operation. So that's the property there. It is existing, and we agree that the rural commercial zone is suitable for that property.
Is that the park? The mobile home park?
Yes, I do believe so. Yeah.
I delivered a green card there one time
Yes?
for somebody.
Okay,
I'll move it.
is moved. Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. All those in favor, or any question?
Sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a quick statement regarding the changes of these. I respect private property owners' rights and concerns. However, in the spirit of these land use bylaws, care should be exercised when removing protections, especially of shoreline zoning. How can we make these uninformed decisions respectfully based only on the request of someone who attended a meeting? Will future rezoning considerations be so easy to request? Just a question I had. Thank you.
And can I speak to that, Mr. Chair? Yeah, so, no, in the sense that, well, it's easy to request, just as easy to request. In the future, once there is a planning document in place, the process for rezoning is you apply to the municipality. Staff look at it against the policies of the plan. If it's enabled, which they are in many cases, then it goes through a evaluation process to make sure it's consistent with the plan, and then that recommendation goes to planning advisory committee and then council again, and council's decision-making process is this consistent with the municipal planning strategy? So there is a evaluation and a thought process behind it, and before council votes on it, there is a public hearing, and then council's decision's appealable. So there is a process for a rezoning that it goes through in terms of staff and then council, public evaluation, planning advisory committee evaluation as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Motion on the floor. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Count by nay. Motion carried.
Okay. Next one's an industrial property. It's the bakery property in Plymouth. It abuts the community core zone, and we've heard concerns, this is not from the property owner, of course, from the area, about expansion of the operation and the impact that could have on the surrounding residential community. So this is the property here, and I apologize, we probably should have put the zone boundary on it. So it's a very large property, and this is one that we have split zoned. So the existing bakery and food supply operation is in this area, and we've zoned in the draft that portion industrial, and we've also zoned some of the area to the north as industrial, up in behind. This is all community core here along the East River Side Road. So the current draft industrial kind of extends upwards like this. And, our intention there was to allow some expansion of that industrial use on their existing property. Certainly appreciate the concerns and what that might mean in terms of this use expanding behind existing residential areas, community core areas. And so our recommendation in this case would be to adjust the industrial boundaries and actually remove it from this northern portion and extend it out to the eastern portion of their property to the back. Again, having some easy flexibility for expansion, but away from the existing context of development rather than behind it.
Why wouldn't have that been done in the first place? Why would we go with the industrial closer to the housing rather than off in the other direction? Or is there something, I'm wondering, is there something not so useful as you go back that maybe doesn't offer itself to expansion near as easily, or?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to be honest, I think it was probably a oversight on our part and a lack of familiarity with the context, to be honest.
Okay, and the only other question I have on that would, the Ganos who own the property, would, have they been consulted on this, or just the people that weren't happy with it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, not specifically, not with the property owner.
Okay, because without them knowing that we're shifting it in the other direction, they may have had something to say if they knew it was, but I just felt that maybe they should have been consulted as well here, before we move ahead with that, because they own the land, and they're gonna have to live with whatever changes that we make. I would have thought they should have been consulted, maybe.
Sorry, Mr.
Just on Mr., or Warden Parker's comments there, I agree with Warden Parker. To my recollection, towards the back of that property is the tailings from the mine. So it's quite possible that that's unusable just because of the tailings piles and whatnot. So that being said, I do believe if we're going to take the comments from the community, we should also, if we're going to change something, we should also get the comments from the landowner as well.
If I may, Mr. Chair, then yeah, perhaps a motion or a recommendation then would be to direct us or staff. We can figure out how that happens and how we reach the property owner, but to reach out to them between now and the council meeting. And, you know, this is a change that council could easily direct us to make as part of the first reading motion if there's information that comes out from talking to the property owner.
I'll make the motion. You know, that we at least consult with the owner, because it might be that there's another alternative, that you stay back far enough from the homes. We were talking about distance from industrial and whatnot, and still, you know, if that's a much better area to expand in, still be able to expand there, but, you know, allow enough distance between the homes and the development. I don't know the lay of the land up there. I know it's the old Westray site, but I don't know the, you know, if there's some of the stuff left over from the mine is in a certain area, it might not be developable, yeah.
I agree, we should consult with the property owner just to see, maybe they have future plans, and here we are changing something that shouldn't be changed, or maybe they want to change so that they can develop that into residential or something like that, so.
Okay.
Yep, so, it's moved, do we have a seconder? Don't think so.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. Any questions? Hearing none, all those in favor say by saying aye.
All right,
Count by nay, motion carried.
And through you, or so, sorry, the last two here are related to the shoreline zone. And I apologize, I don't know why I don't have a map of these two. But one is at the intersection of Black Rock Road and Pictou Landing Road. We have an area of shoreline zone there. There was a quote-unquote lake there and a private road that, you know, kind of met our criteria for applying the shoreline zone. The property owner in question who owns the lake has contacted us and clarified that it is a man-made pond, and that the private road that's there serves multiple properties, but they're all owned by him, and therefore, you know, doesn't feel it's really that private road that justifies this zoning, and he does have some, you know, quasi resource uses there as well, a small mill and that kind of thing. So his suggestion or his request was for us to remove that shoreline zone at that intersection around that pond. And looking at the context and understanding the situation there better, we agree with that.
Okay. Just on that, that's Black Point Road, it should be,
Yes.
yeah,
Yep, you're right.
yeah.
that I don't know this road, Black Rock Road.
Bonnie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have another statement regarding Olding Island. The subdivision that was planned on the west end of the island never came to fruition. Quote, could these plans be reviewed in the future? I think it bears repeating that care should be exercised when removing the protections afforded by shoreline zoning. Thank you.
This here property, I know it well too, and it's a fish pond, like, that's what he does, like, that's a fish hatchery. So having that in the S1 zone doesn't make sense to me, so. Great. And it's divided by a public road, so it's not on the shore. Okay.
So moved.
It's moved. Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. All those, that's to remove the shoreline zoning and apply the rural general zone.
Yeah, at Black Point
Okay.
Road and Pictou Landing Road.
Is moved and seconded. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Right.
Count by nay. One nay. Motion carried.
Which brings me to the very last public comment that we got that has implications for the documents, and that is the shoreline zone on Olding Island in Miragamish Harbor. So there is the land has been subdivided on the west end. You know, there's lots created. There's a right-of-way for a potential road. So seeing that was kind of again, meeting our criteria for applying the shoreline zones, and we did that to the whole island. The owner there, or some of the owners, there's a couple of owners on that island, and they were concerned that their island is zoned differently than other rural general zones or islands in the area. And, you know, we did explain to them that it was based on that private road subdivision, and as identified by the property owner, that was done. It's never been sold or developed. In this, you know, access to the island itself is the challenge. So in general, they would like to see the Olding Island reverted to the rural general, just like other islands in the area. And yeah, I think on the balance, given the context, we feel that's a reasonable request.
Warden?
I just wanted to be sure what we're saying here, and I take it as factual, what we're hearing from you, Ian, that other islands are treated the way we're gonna treat this island. Somehow this one got treated differently for some reason. Is that what we're hearing?
Yeah, it got treated differently because it had that